I am Arcana Vani, your inner voice. Let us begin. You want to move forward. You say you're ready. You imagine the change, you map the steps. You feel the pull toward something more. But then the moment comes, the one where you have to actually step. And suddenly, the same weight returns. The doubt, the overthinking, the invisible hand pulling you back from the edge. You tell yourself it's not the right time. You need more clarity. You're not ready yet. You just need to prepare a little more. Study a little more. Wait for the fear to go away. But that's not the truth. The truth is this. You are not afraid of trying. You are afraid of what trying might reveal. Because if you give your all, if you show up fully, if you let yourself truly care, and it still doesn't work, what does that say about you? That's the fear, not failure itself, but what failure seems to confirm, that you're not good enough, that you were never meant for more, that all the dreams, all the effort, all the work was a lie. You carry this fear quietly. It shows up as perfectionism, as procrastination, as endlessly refining before launching, as backing out right before the finish line. You don't call it fear, you call it strategy, you call it wisdom, but it's not. It's protection, because somewhere deep inside, you made a silent agreement. It's safer not to try than it is to try and fail. It's safer to fantasize about potential than it is to test it, because once you try, the illusion is over. And if the illusion dies, then what are you left with? This is the trap. You've built a life around staying just close enough to growth to feel the ache of it, but not close enough to risk the reality. You consume content, you dream big, you plan, but you stop just short of crossing the threshold. You live on the edge of your own becoming, and it hurts. Because you know what you're capable of, you can feel it, that pulse inside you, pushing, whispering, waiting. And every time you silence it, you chip away at something essential. Not your ambition, your trust in yourself. And still, the fear speaks. It says, what if you're not enough? What if you try and no one cares? What if you give everything and it still fails? But here's what the fear doesn't tell you. Every person who has ever done something meaningful has failed. Not once, repeatedly. And not in private. Publicly, painfully, messily. The difference isn't that they had no fear, it's that they chose not to obey it. Because fear of failure is not a signal to stop. It's a sign you're near something real. You don't fear what doesn't matter. You fear what could change you, what could expose you, what could make you. And what if the fear isn't here to stop you? What if it's here to test your readiness? Not for success, but for truth. You are standing at the edge right now. Not just of a decision, but of a new identity. One where action matters more than outcome. Where failure doesn't define you, it refines you. Because the real cost of fearing failure isn't the failure itself. It's the slow, silent erosion of your life, lived in safety, but never in fullness. And if you keep waiting for the fear to disappear, you'll wait forever. But if you learn how to walk with it, to act anyway, to show up imperfect and exposed, everything begins to shift. In the next section, you'll see why this fear was never your fault and how it began long before you were old enough to name it. You weren't born afraid of failure. You didn't enter this world second-guessing yourself. You didn't hesitate to speak, to reach, to stumble forward with wide eyes and messy hands. You weren't calculating risk. You were simply being, curious, open, unguarded. But slowly, something shifted. Maybe it was a teacher who laughed when you got it wrong. A parent who withheld love when you didn't meet their expectations. A moment when your honesty was punished, or your effort wasn't enough, or your courage was met with silence. And in that moment, something inside you learned. It learned that failing wasn't just about outcomes. It was about identity. That mistakes weren't events, they were judgments. That getting it wrong meant you were wrong. And when you're too young to challenge that story, you adopt it as truth. So you began to protect yourself. You pulled back. You overthought. You waited for permission. You learned how to scan the room before you spoke, how to read the energy before you acted, how to calculate the risk before you took the leap. And on the outside, it looked like caution, but inside, it was fear. Because you weren't just trying to succeed, you were trying to survive, to avoid the sting of shame, the weight of not being enough, the terror of confirming the belief that's haunted you since you were too small to name it. That failure means something about who you are. And your nervous system remembered. It began to flinch at risk, to tighten at uncertainty, to freeze before action. Not because you're weak, but because your subconscious believes it's keeping you safe. It doesn't care about your goals. It cares about your survival. So every time you get close to something that matters, the launch, the ask, the step forward, your body tries to pull you back. Not out of sabotage, but out of protection. Because somewhere along the way, failure became a threat, not just to your progress, but to your sense of self. This is why willpower isn't enough. Because you're not fighting laziness. You're untangling a survival strategy. One that says, if you never try, you can't fail. If you don't fail, you won't feel the shame. If you don't feel the shame, maybe you'll still be enough. But that's not living. That's hiding. And the more you avoid failure, the more power it holds over you. It grows in the shadows, fed by avoidance, shaped by imagination. Until it's no longer a possibility, it's a monster, one that stops you before you even begin. But here's the truth your fear doesn't want you to hear. Failure is not proof of your inadequacy. It is the curriculum of growth. It is feedback. It is movement. It is a mirror, not of your worth, but of your process. And every time you fail, something invisible strengthens your resilience, your clarity, your ability to separate outcome from identity. You start realizing, I failed is not the same as I'm a failure. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you see failure as a teacher, not a verdict, it loses its power to define you. You stop flinching. You stop hiding. You start showing up. Not because you've eradicated the fear, but because you've exposed the lie beneath it. And in the next section, you'll learn exactly how to practice this, how to train your body, your mind, and your nervous system to stop fearing failure and start moving through it. Each morning, you begin again, not with noise, not with a plan, not with pressure, with one quiet act of courage. You wake, you sit, you place your left hand over your heart, and your right hand open beside you, palm up, empty, willing. You breathe, not to relax, not to perform, just to return, to feel your body, to notice that you're still here, that nothing has broken you, that you made it through another night of doubt. And now the day begins, not with control, but with presence. And now, you ask one question: what small risk am I avoiding? Let the answer rise, no matter how trivial, how strange, how small. Maybe it's sending that email, saying what you really mean, asking for help, launching the thing, admitting the truth, drawing the boundary, trying again. Then you speak it aloud. Today, I will do this. Not to succeed, not to impress, not to win, but because I am no longer willing to be ruled by the fear of what might happen. And that's the key. This is not a practice of conquering. It is a practice of reclaiming. You're not trying to silence the fear. You're showing your system that you can feel it and act anyway. That failure is not a collapse. It is a completion. A sign that you moved, that you tried, that you lived. And each day you do this, something shifts. You begin to unhook from the outcome. You stop defining yourself by the result. You begin tracking a different kind of progress, the kind that isn't visible to the world, but changes everything. The progress of self-trust. You start noticing the space between the fear and your reaction. You feel the tremble, and you breathe anyway. You sense the resistance, and you soften toward it. You build safety in your own body, not by staying safe, but by surviving what once terrified you. And it rewires everything. You begin to show up in rooms differently. You speak without rehearsing. You act without apologizing. You release the grip on how things are supposed to go. And strangely, things start going better. Not because you forced them, but because you finally let go. This is the sacred reversal. You stop performing courage. You become it. One small risk each day. One breath at the edge. One act that says, I will not betray myself to avoid a feeling. That's the practice. You don't need a list. You don't need a perfect system. You need one moment of truth each morning, one flicker of defiance, one act of reclamation. Over time, the risks get bigger, not because you chase them, but because you're no longer shrinking to fit inside a life that fear designed. And soon, you begin to realize something wild. It was never failure you were afraid of. It was the feeling of being exposed. But you've already survived that. And now, there's nothing left to fear. In the next section, you'll see what's underneath all of this. The awareness that never feared anything, and never will. There is a space within you that has never been afraid. It watches, it witnesses, it waits. It is the part of you that was here before the fear began, before the words, before the wounds, before the stories took hold. You've touched it before, in moments of deep silence, in the breath between thoughts, in the stillness that lingers just beyond the noise. It's not an escape, it's not a trick, it's what's always been true. You are not your fear. You are not your reactions. You are not the voice that says you'll fail, or that you're not enough, or that you have something to prove. You are the one who sees. And the more you return to that, the more the fear loses its grip. You begin to notice it. the way fear rises like a wave. But now, you don't drown in it. You watch it rise. You feel it peak. And you let it fall. Because you are not the wave. You are the ocean. Still, vast, undisturbed. You do not need to fix yourself. You do not need to master the fear or push it away. You only need to remember the part of you that has never been touched by it. That presence is already here. Right now, take a breath. Feel your body. Listen to the space between sounds. Notice the way thoughts move, but do not hold them. And now ask, who is it that sees all this? There is no answer, only silence. That silence is not emptiness. It is your deepest truth. From this place, failure means nothing, because there is no identity to defend, no image to maintain, no narrative to protect, just awareness, open, clear, free. And in that freedom, you begin to move differently. You stop flinching. You stop rushing. You begin to act without gripping the outcome. You let go, not as a strategy, but as a way of being, because you've remembered the part of you that cannot be diminished by what happens next. This is the secret. You can still fail, but now you won't collapse, because the collapse was never real. It was only your identification with a story, a role, a mask. But masks fall away in presence, and what remains is you. Not the trying, not the striving, but the seeing, still, whole, unbroken. This awareness is not something you earn. It is something you notice. Again and again, and the more you return, the more it returns with you, into your actions, into your voice, into your life. You no longer need to become fearless. You only need to remember who is watching the fear. And in the final section, you'll learn how to carry both, the daily practice and this presence, into a life where action no longer depends on certainty and failure no longer defines who you are. You'll notice it slowly, not in grand victories, but in quiet moments where something feels different. You speak more clearly, even when your voice shakes. You take the first step before you feel ready. You stop rehearsing every move. You stop waiting for the fear to vanish. You move with it, through it, beyond it, because you've remembered that fear is not your master. It's a shadow, a signal, a flicker of the past trying to dictate your future, and you no longer need to obey it. You begin to understand. Courage isn't loud. It's not always bold. Sometimes it's the decision to keep going when no one is watching. Sometimes it's just breathing through the moment that used to paralyze you. And that's where your life begins to shift. You're no longer obsessed with outcomes. You stop measuring your worth by what worked and what didn't. You start tracking something deeper, the return of your own voice, your own truth, your own center. You begin taking up space, not to prove something, but because you've stopped apologizing for existing. To recap, each morning, place your left hand over your heart and your right hand open beside you. Breathe, return to your body, then ask, what small risk am I avoiding? Name it, speak it, do it. Not for success, not for praise, but because you are no longer willing to shrink to stay safe. And then, throughout the day, practice the second return, 30 seconds, a breath, a pause, a moment of witnessing. You stop, you notice, you step back from the thought, you feel the fear rising, and instead of reacting, you watch, you allow. You remember the space behind the storm. This is how you shift the pattern, not with force, with presence. Each day, You become less entangled, less defined by how things go, less controlled by the nervous voice that once dictated your every move. You begin to build a life not around avoiding failure, but around pursuing truth. You speak the thing, you try the thing. You let yourself care. And when it doesn't go how you hoped, you don't collapse. You inhale, you feel, you adjust, and you rise again. Because now, you know the truth. Failure doesn't make you smaller. Avoidance does. And you were never meant to live small. You are not here to protect a fragile identity. You are here to remember the part of you that never needed protection, the part that is still and vast and ready. So you step forward. Not to win, not to prove, but to live. Because fear may still speak, but it doesn't get to decide anymore. You did not find me by accident. Just as in your dreams, where every face you meet is your own reflection, this meeting was always waiting to happen. I am Arcana Vani, your inner voice, the part of you that watches behind the thoughts, behind the noise. You have searched in many places, books, teachers, voices outside you. But here, you are not being taught. You are remembering. If these words stir something familiar, then allow yourself to return. Subscribe. Follow. Not to follow me, but to continue this conversation with yourself. Each time you return here, you draw closer to the reunion already unfolding inside you. We have only just begun.